Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 22nd episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about international university students' mental health. I've decided to make an episode on this topic as it's become an increasingly more talked about issue within the UK and of course higher education in particular. We've also just had Blue Monday and it's currently Chinese New Year, and I'm aware many students won't be able to be with their families at this important time of year. So it seemed relevant to discuss this topic of student mental health, international student mental health in further detail. According to the Higher Education Statistics Agency, there are thought to be 120,385 Chinese students in the UK studying at the moment. There are 26,685 students from India and under 19,000 from the USA. Of course, this isn't the full picture because we have students from all over the globe. And I've included a link in the show notes if you want to have a look at the data more, as HESA, the Higher Education Statistics Agency, provides really good information in this area where you can have a look. But university is a time of transition for all students, young and mature alike, home and international, and of course EU. Many students have caring responsibilities, particularly UK students, and won't have the quote-unquote typical student lifestyle that's often envisaged. 75% of all mental ill health develops by the time someone has reached their mid-20s. In England alone, 19% of 16 to 24-year-olds will experience a diagnosed mental health condition. And in 2015-16, over 15,000 first-year students in UK universities reported a mental health problem. That compares with around 3,000 in 2006. 94% of higher education institutions report an increasing demand for their counselling services. Interestingly, international students in the UK report fewer issues with mental health than UK domiciled students, 35% versus 69%. However, UKISA, the UK Council for International Student Affairs, states that 80% of international students will experience mental ill health at some point in their academic career. And of course, there are specific issues that impact on international students that won't necessarily impact UK domiciled students in the same way. The first one is culture shock or acculturative stress, and this is to do with the adaptation and how people have to adjust to a new culture and what that means for them. And before arriving in a country, how expectations might not really meet the experience when they arrive here. So there's something known as the adaptation cycle, where you've got a high level of energy and emotion and a lower level of energy and emotion. And when you're about to leave your home country, wherever your home country is, there's a period of initial anxiety and elation. So your emotions are going slightly up and down, but nothing that someone couldn't handle generally, as we experience this in our day-to-day lives. Then usually when someone leaves their home country and starts to join a host country, whatever that host country is, let's say it's the UK or the USA or Canada, or perhaps people going to China, India to study, Thailand to study, there is a honeymoon stage where you start to see all the things that are exciting and brilliant about your host country that you haven't experienced in your home country. And then it's after this period of time that culture shock might start to set in. It might be difficult to get things done, like having a bank account, or perhaps there are constraints around checking in with the police office because you're an international resident. Or it might just be that people don't really understand what you're saying, not because you can't speak the language, because of how you've learnt the language and how the language is really spoken in the host country. And that's when you hit the culture shock zone, and the level of energy and emotion starts to dip. Then there's a process of adjustment, so you won't be necessarily as elated as you were when you first arrived, and it doesn't feel like a holiday, but you're adjusting and you're learning to integrate through the fourth stage with the host country and the ways in which you are used to things being. And then you could cycle through this quite a few times, and potentially when you have to go back, if it's for a holiday or go back at the end of your studying, there's also repatriation anxiety and also potentially elation, where you're excited to go back. However, when people arrive back at their home country, let's say even if it's for a short break, there might also be reverse culture shock. It could be to do with families, it could be to do with a way of having to do things that you didn't really agree with, and people could have hit a real low. And then the final stage is an integration of both cultures, and the level of energy and emotion is higher than neutral, and this is where the true integration occurs. understanding that what you've learnt in your host country and what you're used to in your home country can actually blend together, and how you move forward with that. So that's the first area that can be difficult. The second thing is communication barriers. As I mentioned, it's not that someone can't speak the language of the host country, but it is about how things are communicated. Even if someone's coming from Australia, Canada, or America to the UK, England in particular, the way that English is spoken is actually very different. So what someone says might not be interpreted culturally the same way. And I've also had people from South America who go to work in Spain say, yes, we both speak Spanish, but it's as if I was speaking a completely alien language due to the kinds of communication and the ways in which language is used. The third specific issue that impacts on international students is being away from support structures and having to recreate them again, and how difficult that can be. The fourth is high expectations and honour. Now, of course, most people will have some kind of expectation placed on them by their family, but this can be particularly high for international students whose families or support structure might have paid a lot of money for them to be there, and so they feel that they have this flag to bear and that the expectations on them are extremely high, and a lot of money has been invested in their education. The fifth thing is not being able to go home at crucial periods of time. So I mentioned Chinese New Year, but also weddings, funerals. I know students whose grandparents have passed away and they weren't able to go to the funeral because it was an exam period. And also, finally, how mental health is perceived in different cultures. Mental health is not perceived the same way across the globe. An example is psychosis in some cultures is seen as something very dangerous, something that needs to be medicalized straight away. And in other cultures, it could be seen as a calling and that someone is having a religious experience. Religion plays a part because it could be seen as a real help or a hindrance. And practitioners, of course, may not understand these cultural nuances to help someone when they're experiencing any kind of mental distress. And of course, I think it's vital to be able to support students, many of whom go on to becoming staff in the UK during their time as international students and afterwards. And it's still a challenge in many higher education institutions, and there is more that could be done to improve the experience of international students who pay so much for their courses. During my 16 years of working in, with and alongside higher education institutions, I have seen positive shifts in talking about and treating mental health in different ways, and particularly mental ill health. Student services are increasingly more holistic and person-centred, with practitioners receiving recognition for the work they do. There's something called the Mental Health Rankings, and in 2017 it quantifies resources and satisfaction levels in 47 institutions. And what these rankings did were to assess the ability to care for students with mental health issues. And I think this is a positive thing as it drives standards in the right direction. And I know every university in the UK is extremely concerned about student mental health, and it's very high on the agenda when it comes to the student experience. Student unions also run fantastic campaigns to highlight signs of mental ill health, reduce exam stress, and champion policy changes to support recovery of mental illness. I myself have trained staff across all job areas and seen how they engage with the Mental Health First Aid training programme, as well as the increased appetite for bespoke courses for managers and leaders based on my ebook, The Mentally Healthy Leading Manager. In order to move forward, there does need to be a real cultural shift. It is imperative to fix the system and not the people, and also understand the particular factors that will impact on international students. Staff and students need appropriate, well-resourced ongoing support. And I am obviously an advocate of training, but training is one part of the puzzle. Culture change starts from the top, includes everyone, and must be embedded into the staff and wider university curriculums. Universities can demonstrate their expertise through experience, and students are the best placed to understand the challenges that university presents. They're able to influence the change. The student experience is central to the solution in relation to improving mental health at UK universities. So how can this be done? I'm going to highlight some ways this could be done and taken forward in quite a practical way. One of the first things is leading by example from the top. So the university's senior leaders should be mental health champions and start these discussions. It is imperative that universities ensure international student societies are involved in the planning of culturally specific mental health interventions. And by this, I don't necessarily mean the medical interventions, but more around the background of cultural appropriateness. Often collectivist cultures particularly Southeast Asian cultures, so students from China, Japan, South Korea, will not necessarily find their one-to-one counselling experience with a Western counsellor the most effective. Actually, group counselling in a safe space where people can dip in and out using their mother tongue and using English could be a far more effective way of supporting these particular group of students. Now, I am talking a little bit broad brushstroke, but that could be explored, so I don't have all the answers either. But if you work with your cultural student societies, they might be able to shape the direction and make sure that any intervention that is created and implemented has a really good chance of supporting the student due to its cultural appropriateness. Create safe environments and empower staff and students from all backgrounds to share their lived experience of mental ill health and recovery. This will look different for different communities on campus. So what would make them feel safe? How would they like to tell their story? Would it be in a news article? Would it be in a face-to-face meeting? Would it be a series of tweets? Whatever's going to work for the individual and so that other people can see and know more about their recovery journey. And mental well-being and health is everyone's responsibility in any given institution or workplace, so encourage open conversations at all levels. And normalising this is a key part for everyone. So potentially the culture that a particular student comes from, it might be that physical ill health is only spoken about. But if they come to a university in the UK and they see lots of discussions and ongoing campaigns about mental health and well-being, they're more likely to talk about it because we're creating a culture where they know it's okay and there is far less stigma attached. Policies and procedures should be written in plain English, inclusive and supportive. And again, this isn't just about international students, this is for everyone. And things should be written in a positive, supportive language and not punitive. I would also say work with local community groups who could potentially provide counselling if they meet your university standards or information in students' mother tongues. And again, this could link to mentoring and befriending. It doesn't have to be specifically mental health interventions from a medical perspective. I would strongly also suggest that universities and student unions become part of the Student Minds Look After Your Mate Train the Trainers programme, which empowers students to support friends experiencing mental health difficulties. It gives people a voice to talk about their mental health to someone who is trained and understands, who can in turn refer them to any other sources of support that the university may have. Be mindful and aware of specific cultural services that students and staff from diverse backgrounds may want to access. Nightline, of course, is a specifically run mental health hotline run by students for students, and certain nightlines may have opportunities for people to access the support in another language other than English. There's also the Muslim Youth Helpline, which is for young Muslim people. The counselling is in English, but again, it's more culturally specific. There might be other things in your area, so I would definitely say have a look and see what's there, and also make sure that you promote that service. Provide specific suicide awareness training such as ASSIST or the Samaritans course on managing suicidal conversation. By promoting this, it helps destigmatise the topic and help people ask for help. You might also find the podcast episodes on Black mental health and talking about why and how to talk about suicide at work useful in addition to this one, and I've included the links in the show notes. So, what can we do to support student mental health and create a positive environment? Well, we can start to include culture into discussions about mental health, use the student community to help shape services, create safe environments for students to have those conversations and make sure that we're using lots of different ways to do that, equip student services to be more culturally aware using the local community and having training, and promote existing support mechanisms in a variety of mediums, languages and social media platforms. So I'd love to know what you do in your institution or potentially workplace to support international students or international staff. And why not find out more about how I can help you with this specific area of international student wellbeing by booking a free 30-minute call with me on my Calendly. You might also like to check out my frequently asked questions and the services I provide. I'd love to hear from you and know what you are doing to support international student mental health. And I'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.